What's up guys, TCG here and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today guys, we're going to be doing a bit of a quicker and easier video, and today I'm going to be talking about kind of why I currently think that Dragapult EX is the Pokemon TCG's most toxic problem right now. Now, it's not to say that Dragapult is like unbeatable or that it's like ruining the Pokemon TCG, because while it's certainly super annoying and it's everywhere, it was in 5 of the top 8 slots at Atlanta Regionals, which I'm recording this the day after finals, where Andrew Hendrick got second out of 2,684 players, and the rest of them were almost all Dragapults. I just wanted to kind of talk about how I currently feel about Dragapult, and how I think that Dragapult is kind of showing off, it's kind of the representation of a lot of the current problems that Pokemon has as a trading card game in the competitive space. So right now I have Andrew Hendrick's list pulled up here. This is a very interesting list, just because it does have a few different things that are different than an average Dragapult list. Now, Dragapult seems to be kind of figured out at this point. It's kind of got the same sort of core, like there is some deviation, but the same core strategy stays the same. You start the first few turns by using Budew, which is, if you've watched my channel recently, you know is one of my least favorite cards in the entire game, because you can basically just sit behind Itchy Pollen. Your opponent kind of has a slower setup, and you don't really care about having a slower setup if your opponent Itchy Pollen's you, because you can just evolve your Dreepies into Dracloaks. You can use your Dracloaks, use Recon Directive for as long as you want, basically set up this huge hand while sitting behind your Budew, and then when you're ready to go, you just go into Dragapult, and then ironically enough, Dragapult is the perfect counter to Budew, because Budew has 30 HP. You can just go ahead and use Dragapult to wipe out your opponent's Budew, meaning that ironically, Budew's biggest ally is also its biggest destroyer. So, or second biggest destroyer, Monkey Dory technically takes that spot, but for the sake of like a deck specifically, Dragapult is the most common, like straightforward Budew counter in a sort of like centralized deck. Now, of course, Dragapult has the incredible Phantom Dive attack, which is the main focus here. Phantom Dive does 200 damage, which is kind of underwhelming in a format with like 320, 330 HP Pokemon, but it more than makes up for it with its put 6 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like, which means that effectively 60 damage is going to your opponent's bench at any time. Now, Dragapult has had sort of like this huge like butterfly effect through the game of like everyone having to swap from playing better 60 HP basics if you're playing like a stage 1 or stage 2 deck. If you need to evolve at all from a smaller Pokemon, you basically have to run 70 HP basics in order to survive, or you get knocked out by Phantom Dive and your opponent can take 2 to 3 prizes a turn with Dragapult, which is just super toxic and it's really annoying to deal with. But even if you do play 70 HP basics, even if you're ironically enough playing your own Dragapult, you have 70 HP, you're like, okay, well, I'll be fine, right? Well, that's where Hawlucha comes into play. Hawlucha has the Flying Entry ability, which allows you to put 10 damage on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon when you place Hawlucha down onto your bench. So basically, this allows Dragapult to take potentially a 3-prize turn out of nowhere by putting like 10 damage on a Pheasantipity EX, and then also going back a little bit, sorry, that's too far. I went the wrong direction even. You can put 10 damage on the Pheasantipity, and then 10 damage on a smaller basic like Dreepy, and then boom, you take 3 prizes in a turn, and there's not really much that your opponent can do about it if they get stuck behind Budew Lock and they can't find their cards that they need in order to kind of get past that. And then, of course, I didn't even mention the Dusknor line, of course. This is the biggest kind of like... This is kind of like the icing on the cake. It's kind of like the bit of extra toxicness that this deck needs in order to truly be the most annoying and like kind of disruptive deck to the format overall, and that's because the Cursed Blast ability on both Dusclops and Dusknor can help fix math for your Phantom Dives. Basically, Dusknor can use Cursed Blast on a bigger Pokemon in the active spot, so you can just go ahead and use Cursed Blast, knock out whatever's in the active, even if it has 300 plus HP, and then you can spread your damage counters as you want. Or can help, like, kind of get rid of a smaller Pokemon on the bench, so you don't have to deal with it later. Or you have Dusclops, so you can just blow up your opponent's active Budu or something like that. Or you can fix math later on down the line. It just kind of, this entire engine is focused around kind of abusing basically this core engine of Budu Stall, go into Dracloaks for a few turns, let yourself set up while your opponent struggles along not being able to use items, and then you follow it up with devastating Phantom Dive turn after turn after turn, and if your opponent tries to do anything to respond, then you can use things like Counter Catcher, you can use Iono, and you can use Unfair Stamp to basically just lock your opponent out of the game, and that's kind of what Dragapult's entire strategy is. Now, it's really toxic, and it's really annoying, but there are ways around it, or at least there should be ways around it, which ironically come through Dragapult, but there also is a direct counter in the form of, just 1 second, there we go, Lily's Clefairy EX. Now, this is Lily's Clefairy is essentially like the Drapion V for Dragapult. For those of you who are, like, newer to the game, Drapion V was essentially a direct counter to Mew VMAX. It was a dark type, and Mew VMAX was a psychic type, meaning that Drapion V could one-shot Mew VMAX basically guaranteed, because it did 190 damage, that transfers to 360 damage. Mew VMAX could not tank a hit like that, and therefore Mew VMAX would get one-shotted. And same thing here with Lily's Clefairy. Of course, it does require you to have the proper energy in play, and it does require a certain amount of bench Pokemon in order for Lily's Clefairy to actually take the knockout, but Lily's Clefairy has the ability Fairy Zone, which makes Dragon Pokemon have a weakness to Psychic types, or quote-unquote Fairy types, and that's kind of what the counter to Dragapult has been, and I'm kind of grateful that this does exist. This does mean that Dragapult is not like untouchable, because the thing with Mew VMAX is that Mew VMAX was one of the most toxic decks in the game. I loved it because I played it religiously for a long time, and I know, but anyways, Lily's Clefairy essentially is supposed to be like the direct counter by getting rid of the fact that Dragapult EX has no weakness. One of the biggest sort of like selling points for the new Dragon types when they were re-released in Scarlet and Violet is that they don't have weakness, or when they were re-released in Sword and Shield, like sort of the later half of Sword and Shield, is that they didn't have any weakness. This also means they have no resistance, and that they still require 2 different energy types. So for Dragapult, you don't really care about this, because you only need 2 energies total to attack, and also the no weakness thing is incredibly strong, because Dragapult has 320 HP, which means before Clefairy, you just had to straightforward hit 320 damage, or you had to sacrifice a prize card with Dusknor in order to do that. So the good thing about Lily's Clefairy is it allows a lot of decks like Terrabox, the Terrapagos deck, and also things like Gardevoir to be able to run Lily's Clefairy, which actually we did see Lily's Clefairy beat Dragapult in the final third match in the finals of Atlanta to win the championship. So essentially what this means is that Lily's Clefairy has become sort of the answer that Pokemon has given us, the answer that Creatures has given us. I still don't feel like it's enough, though. It does require Psychic energy to use. It does require you to have 2 energy attached to it, which usually you can do with, like, Crispin, but that is a little bit of a sacrifice in a deck slot compared to, like, Drapion, which could be basically used for free if your opponent had a lot of Fusion Strike Pokemon on their bench, and you could use it to take 3 prize cards, whereas Lily's Clefairy can only take 2. And because Mew VMAX did give you 3 prize cards, and Dragapult only gives you 2. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces to this, and there's a lot of issues with Dragapult, and there are certainly a lot of different counters to it. But I do feel like right now, the way that the game is moving forward, Dragapult is sort of like the omnipresent threat. And yes, I have said omnipresent threat for the for other videos that I've done in this style. When Charizard EX was the thing, everyone was running Charizard. When Iron Hands was a huge problem, everyone was running Iron Hands in something. Now with Dragapult, Dragapult is kind of just everywhere in the game right now. In fact, I'm looking at Limitless right now, and it has a, in the top decks feature, it has a 40% meta share. Now, in like the top cut sort of, and in the time that it's been in regionals, it's had 9 wins in regionals, and it's had 2 international wins, which is absolutely insane. And like, there's an entire just block of just Dragapult while looking at tournament results. Now, on PokeHive on Twitter, I'm looking, and Dragapult EX doesn't have as nearly as much of a representation overall, according to their graphs and stuff, but it has a 63.5% win rate, which is disgusting for a deck like this. Like, for a meta that's supposed to be more leaning towards slowing things down, which Budu definitely has, Dragapult takes advantage of the game slowing down by continuing to just go faster. Like, the way that the deck structure works is that it takes advantage of the fact that the game will be slowed down enough to where you can slow your opponent down. You're able to manage being slowed down yourself by using cards like Jacques to be able to just keep evolving into Dracloaks, without really caring about the fact that your opponent might be item locking you, and then using other cards to slowly set up before you hit with an explosive Phantom Dive. So the main issue that I have with Dragapult is that it's basically, it's 2 sides of the same coin, but if that coin was always a positive result. Like, sometimes when the phrase 2 sides of the same coin is used, there can be 2 different, like, sides, obviously, where one is, like, a really good result. Like, for example, Charizard has a really great matchup. Again, or formerly, Charizard had a really great matchup against something like Future Box or something like Raging Bolt, because it was just able to take those prize cards and kind of move forward. Maybe not Raging Bolt, because it had Teal Mask. Anyways, Charizard had great matchups against things that were 2 prizers, because it could basically just, like, easily win those matchups, whereas if it went up against a single prize deck, it kind of struggled a bit more, without Dusknor and stuff, because of the fact that it just kind of, that's not the way it's supposed to go. It's not supposed to trade 1 for 1 for 1 for 1, because the opponent can slowly whittle you down. Maybe not single prize. Sorry, it's been a very long weekend for me. I'm recovering from seasonal allergies, but the thing here, what I'm trying to say is that every deck usually has a 2-sided coin to it, where it has great matchups against some things, and it has horrible matchups against other things. And for Dragapult, the only negative matchup that it currently has in the mainstream meta is Arcaladon. And even it's still a 45% win rate against Arcaladon, according to PokeHive. And that just feels like really, really crazy to think about. Like, when you look at the other matchups that it has, Gardevoir, ironically, has an 85% win rate against Gardevoir, and against the other matchups, it has a 63% win rate against Terrapagos, or like the sort of Terra box. It has a positive matchup against basically everything in the format right now, including even Goldango, which is currently kind of like its hard counter in general, is like Goldango is structured in a way that Dragapult can't really knock out the Goldangos. What I'm trying to say is essentially, like, it has positive matchups against the matchups that shouldn't be positive. And even if it does go against a matchup where it's like, oh, well, I can just out-turbo you, I can just beat you by going faster than you, thanks to Budu, you can basically just say, nope, I'm not going to deal with all of these stupid... sorry. Basically deal with all of these, like, insane, crazy, fast-paced strategies that would allow you to win in the regular means. No, I'll just sit behind Budu. I'll use Itchy Pollen over and over and over again while I set up so that way I can attack your underdeveloped board. And I'm just not a fan of the way that Dragapult does this, and the way that it abuses comeback mechanics in a way that is even more toxic than Charizard was with, like, Dusknor, Briar, sort of that sort of stuff, because Dusknor just has a more toxic sort of deck structure to it. And with the main focus of Dragapult focusing less on playing the Sparkling Crystal as its ace spec, and instead running Unfair Stamp to add basically an extra bit of a sting to your opponent daring knocking any of your Pokemon out, it just kind of gives a more toxic vibe to it. And also, this Luxurious Cape, I saw this in Andrew's list, and I just was sitting there like, what am I watching? If you watch Top 4, you'll just see everyone was playing Budu the entire time. Like, if you just scroll through the entire Day 2 VOD, you'll see Budu in the active spot for almost both players nearly the entire time, and it was so boring to watch. Anyways, Luxurious Cape basically buffs Budu to a point where you can't just go Monkey Dory KO. It's a mess. What I'm trying to say, long story short, is that Dragapult essentially is just the de facto deck in the format that can kind of just do anything and not really care about the opponent's response, because it just has so many self-sufficient options, because Dracloak can just draw you out of a bad hand, Dragapult cleans up anything that gets sent out, and Dusknor kind of fixes all the math that you need to, same with Hawlucha, and then Budu stalls for most of the game. So it's just, Dragapult essentially just abuses the core mechanics and the core cards that are in the game right now to a level that I don't really like as much. Now, is it the best deck in the game because of these things? Absolutely, but there's still some clear counterplay with certain decks like Terrapagos having like Bouffalon in order to tank damage, stuff like that. The problem with that is just Dragapult works around it. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that it's not as bad as other decks that we've seen in the past, like Rainbow Lugia, for example, where it's like just so dominant that there's no point in playing anything else. The meta is still pretty healthy at the moment, but if I had to pin any sort of major problem with the game right now, it would definitely be on Dragapult. So yeah, that's kind of just my 2 cents on Dragapult EX. It's just appearing everywhere right now, and it's kind of a little bit of a toxic issue in the game, but I wouldn't say it's like so bad to the point where I think we need a nerf or a ban or anything like that. Dragapult is kind of just the biggest issue in the game, and I just wanted to talk about it because I made a community poll, and basically my community was given 3 options. Dragapult, the second option did not look like it was related to Pokemon. I promise it's related to Pokemon, and I think that's what I'm going to work on next. I promise you won't be disappointed. And the third option was going to be part 2 for Terrible Pokemon, which has been a very highly requested thing. Thank you so much for everybody supporting the Terrible Pokemon with Broken TCG Cards video. That is doing really well right now, and it's really cool to hear all your thoughts about it. So I think the next video is going to be something that I kind of choose myself rather than listening to the poll. I'm sorry about that. I just really had this really cool idea, and I want to show it off. But this was a community choice, so I really hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure to let me know what you think about Dragapult right now. I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about because it kind of is sort of one of those decks where it's like there's counters to it, and it's not as like, it's just more of a point of discussion rather than just complaining about the whole thing. And that's really what I want you guys to take away from this video, is that this is not supposed to be complaining. It's more of just, I'm talking about how I currently feel about this card and kind of how it's affecting the game. So, yeah, that's where I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, God bless, have fun, we'll see you out there, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for watching.